So, I can't believe it. I was just coming up the lift to our regular recording slot here on the Strand, and about 4 minutes ago, I heard that Thomas Frank has just been fired by Spurs. We were both watching the game last night and texting each other. I didn't see that coming, did you?
Well, I went on social media this morning and looked at a lot of the reaction of the Tottenham fans, and fairly measured Tottenham fans who were basically saying Frank has to go. And just to sort of run quickly through the background, obviously got appointed at the start of the season, 13 wins, 11 draws and 14 defeats. Okay. Doing well in the Champions League.
Very well.
But domestically, slight echoes of last season under Ange. Terrible in the Premier League. And look, we've talked on this programme about how every position is important. Was it something like £2.7 million? So the fact that they're in 16th, that's costly. And of course, there's the spectre of relegation. And of course, they've got the North London derby coming in 10 days, 11 days' time. So in a way, the board had to react. As we were saying last night, their fans getting sacked in the morning.
Pretty toxic.
They'd turned, and the body language of the players. So, there are various mitigating factors, injuries. We can argue about recruitment. We can argue about the culture of the club, and let's absolutely go into those. But ultimately, he went in there and forgot. Well, he just thought he was still the Brentford manager. And you've worked in these big clubs, Liverpool, Chelsea, Aston Villa. When you go into these clubs, particularly a club like Liverpool, you have to behave like a Liverpool manager. And I don't think when Thomas went from Brentford, where by everyone's judgment, he'd done a fantastic job, was regularly in the running, certainly the shortlist for Manager of the Year, that he just didn't make that step up. He didn't behave and act like a Tottenham manager.
No, well, I think the first thing to say is I think the circumstances of his appointment are probably pretty relevant to his demise as well, because looming over all this is the tumultuous news at the beginning of September that the Daniel Levy era was over at Spurs. And of course, Thomas was therefore the last really significant appointment of the Levy era. And I felt concerned very quickly for Thomas in as long ago as September, October, because the messaging coming out of the club from the Lewis family as now effectively owners taking a new grip on the club was change is in the air. Lots of positive talk about, loosening off the purse strings somewhat. I'm not sure that's happened yet. We'll talk about that. But most significantly, this sort of clean break dynamic. And that made me feel, even then when Thomas started quite well, if you remember, that he would be vulnerable if things went badly. And so it came to pass. They've gone terribly, really, particularly at home. And I will say, Henry, I don't think they were intending to fire this guy this morning. I think it sounds as though last night gave them no choice because of the toxic reaction of fans. And my Spurs mates haven't been having Thomas for the last 2 months.
Take me back to the Daniel Levy, because he left after Thomas was appointed. Was Thomas his man?
100%. The one thing about Daniel, let's be clear, is that when Daniel's in charge, Daniel's in charge. Again, a lot of the messaging that's been coming out since he left, which was a shock to everybody, including Daniel, by the way.
When he got called in?
Yeah, I think when I think Daniel did not see that coming. Nobody saw that coming. It was one of the biggest shocks I've had in my 18 years in the game, and I think it was a shock to everybody in the club. I think it was a shock to Vinay, who'd been appointed by Daniel to be, as it were, CEO.
And a more fan-friendly.
But to Daniel's hands-on executive chairman, okay? Not a CEO where the next line up the hierarchy is a distant owner, but a CEO working for, a hands-on executive chairman.
But what you're suggesting is that Thomas Frank was then exposed from the start because the person who's appointed him
wasn't there. I am suggesting that would be the case. But I would say two other things. That firstly, maybe we should look at when they made that decision, can we learn anything about where they may go next? But secondly, let me tell you, I remember when Daniel appointed Nuno. And I know for a fact he was seriously considering that summer Antonio Conte. We discussed that at the time. And on balance, he decided to go for Nuno. He very quickly faced up to that mistake and fired Nuno and put Conte in after all. I think this is a hindsight point, but looking at the events of the last couple of months, I think Levy would have faced up to Thomas having, your point, just not landed properly at Spurs, just not got what a massive club it is, just not got how important how they play football is to their fan base.
Is to do. You don't sit back in numbers and then leave. Solanke last night was just so isolated. It was a very negative Tottenham performance, and it was interesting just watching it on the television. They had Glenn Hoddle as doing the co-coms, and you think, well, Hoddle is,
what an irony.
I mean, Hoddle is, the embodiment of the beautiful game. To dare is to do. The game is about glory. Even in their difficult eras.
And the thing is, we all know that. We all know that. You don't have to be a Spurs fan to know that is a key part of their DNA. And don't get me wrong. Again, I want to be clear. I don't think that the new regime, let's look at that, the Lewis, Joe Lewis's daughter, I believe, and her son-in-law
Vivian,
as the owners, Vinay as the CEO, Johan Lange as the sporting director. That is the new management regime as of the 5th of September when Daniel left the building.
But does it make it easier for them to get rid of someone who wasn't actually their appointment?
I think it does. I think at the margin. Listen, I don't think there's anything easy about this decision, and I don't think they wanted to make this decision right now for the very obvious point that there isn't an obvious next manager in February 2026. It's a terrible moment to be trying to scratch around and find a manager. But that said, it most definitely wasn't their appointment, and they now will be under the microscope on their next decision. But I do think that they have let this go, frankly, probably a few weeks longer than most people would have.
Is that because they are essentially decent individuals, Thomas is a very likeable character?
You mentioned the word mitigation, and neither of us are here to defend Thomas, because I think on the numbers alone, he was lucky to last as long as he did. But the key mitigating factors are one tactical and one strategic. The tactical point, by which I mean the short term, is the injury issue. It's not just a minor injury issue. Their three most dangerous, most exciting attacking talents in Kulusevski, Maddison and Solanke until recently were out for months on end. So talk about not playing attacking football. If your three best attackers aren't around, that's a mitigating factor. But the bigger mitigating factor, and this is what I want our listeners to really tune into, is that new regime at Spurs, we cannot underestimate the seismic impact of Daniel leaving the building. He controlled every single aspect of that football club for over 20 years, and a completely inexperienced ownership group in Joe Lewis's daughter is now running the club from an ownership standpoint. A brand new chief executive who did not believe when he accepted the job to work for Daniel that he would be in the hot seat. And Johan Lange as a sporting director, with Paratici now having left. So we've got a completely new regime from top to bottom making these decisions. And the one thing I know they felt was that a culture shift was needed in the club. Call it getting rid of the Spursy thing. Call it maybe a different approach to investment and spending than Daniel espoused. Change in the most broad sense of that word. And I think they felt that Thomas was a change agent, and they were willing to cut him slack on results longer than many people would have done, because they understood that change is going to be really difficult. And he ran out of road, because in the end, the oldest cliche in football, it's a results business, and they weren't good enough, H.
You and I love players. We love watching players. We grew up sort of admiring these great players. But the players, in this case, also have to take responsibility. We're talking about mitigation, and everything is being loaded on Thomas Frank. And maybe we'll have to wait until an interview further down the line and he actually sort of addresses some of the issues. But the players can't walk away today, just smiling. They've got to look at themselves in the mirror and say, did I do enough for this club that pays me well, for these amazing supporters who turn up? You're shaking your head, but actually players are culpable. Romero, the captain, how has he helped Thomas Frank by behaving the way he did?
He hasn't, okay. But I
Are
would
you letting the players off the hook?
No, but I would look at that slightly differently, H. I think that one of the things I'm afraid one sees in situations where managers get under pressure is perhaps they go a bit soft, they feel that pressure and feel they need friends, at the training ground, and maybe just take it a bit easy. I don't think he handled Romero right from the very beginning. It was kind of strange the way that a guy everyone knew he was half out the door in the summer, not just stayed, makes him captain, bigs him up. Now,
But sorry, some people might say that's good man management.
Well, it is if it works. But how did Christian thank him for that?
But that's on Christian, not on Frank.
Well, I just think it smacked of weak leadership and management.
I think it smacks of appalling captaincy. And I think this gets to the heart of the issue. Conte, when he left after that fairly lively press conference at St Mary's, hopped on a plane, was it EasyJet, got back to Italy, and he just left and he scorched the room as he left. And basically what he said was, players have to look at themselves, but also there's a culture at this club of leadership or lack of leadership on the pitch and upstairs. And this goes back, you could argue, to the mid-'80s when Tottenham had that team which there was a definite unity about the team and the club. And that has been allowed to drift.
Yeah,
there is no leadership there's no, just finally on the players, because this annoys me that the players are going to escape scot-free on this when they should accept some responsibility to Thomas Frank, a manager who I like as an individual and respect as a manager, that they are not going to take more accountability. We'll probably get Instagram messages from the players. They're probably flying out of their phones as we speak. Thomas, thanks. You've been such an important part in my journey. Well, hang on a sec. Do a little bit more. Romero, stay on the pitch, stay on your feet, tackle properly. And two players who dived yesterday. How is that helping the manager? So I think we've got to be fairly balanced and actually say, Frank, absolutely. There was an element of, and there were echoes of, David Moyes going into Manchester United when Sir Alex Ferguson left, and one or two people at Carrington mentioned that, Everton are in the building today. And there was a different mentality. It was Moyes and his staff, and there was an Everton element. Great club, but not at Manchester. Different DNA, different everything to Manchester United. There was an element.
It's a good analogy.
At Hotspur Way of, Brentford are in the building today. And that is where Thomas, and that's a sort of broader point in football and in leadership, Thomas actually had to sort of step up and realise, I'm not Brentford manager now. Brentford, fantastic club, brilliantly run, better run than Tottenham Hotspur, but it's different expectations. And when he walked, just let me finish on this because this is so important.
Okay.
When he walked into the building, maybe someone needed to say to him, listen, you are at Tottenham Hotspur now. As you were saying, to dare us to do, we need to entertain the fans as well, who pay a hell of a lot of money for their tickets. They haven't always been treated correctly, and there have been issues between the fans and the board in recent years. So make sure you entertain them. You've got to attack, be on the front foot. You do have some attacking players. Completely take your point that some of them are injured as well. But he had to step up, and he didn't. And I absolutely accept that, looking at it now, and I was very much pro his appointment, that actually he was probably too nice for the place. But also, the players can't get away without owning up.
I wasn't convinced about the appointment. And what you've just set out, your Moyes analogy, is such a good one. We're both huge fans of David and Thomas, but there's a horses for courses issue here. We had the same issue when Roy Hodgson came to Liverpool. Sometimes these managers who achieve great things with more limited resources, with more limited talents, those skills don't apply necessarily directly to the different challenge of managing star players in an environment where you're expected to win every week. And history will judge that Thomas did not make that step up. And what they do next is now absolutely fascinating because, we have together in the last few weeks, we've looked at Manchester United and we talked about when Amorim equally had to go, similar and different reasons, by the way. They decided, even longer left in the season, by the way, to make what's called an interim or caretaker appointment as opposed to getting the checkbook out and making a permanent appointment now. And one of the reasons was that Manchester United felt, that there will be a broader
Yep.
selection of top quality managers,
Fact.
available in the summer. It's a fact.
Yep.
It's been referred to as the managerial merry-go-round. And B, a broader selection of managers who will be willing to come in when you know what you're dealing with. Well, if it was difficult for Manchester United to contemplate a permanent appointment a month ago, I think it's even harder for Spurs because, let's face it, United were, I think, 5th when they bulleted Amorim. Are Tottenham 15th or 16th this morning? 16th. So,
And they have no Carrick. I mean, they're not going to go back to Tim Sherwood.
Yes.
Who do they turn to is what you're driving at.
Well, is there an obvious, I don't want to overstate the word, but club legend or hugely popular former player who's a decent coach available on some basis, either because he's out of work or because he'd walk up the road to manage Tottenham? You tell me. Anyone tick that box?
Harry Redknapp hasn't managed for 10 years.
Okay. What about more?
Kieran McKenna, I think, long term, but he's obviously embedded and doing really well at Ipswich. Robbie Keane's doing well at Ferencváros, but they're doing well in Europe as well. I mean, he'd be an attacking choice. So what you're saying is,
but all in contract.
But DNA matters. Someone who understands the
club.
Well,
it did to Manchester United, but my broader point. No, I'm trying to set out the options. I'm Vinay. Okay. Today, right now, I don't think they planned to make this move a week ago. I think they felt they got through. They had the great win in Europe. Feels like a lifetime ago. It was only a week ago. And I really think that last night, a terrible performance by all accounts, left them with no choice.
So just on that, the first half obviously was awful. The press conferences and the television interview on TNT, as well as the press conference afterwards, he was very unconvincing in. His body language was poor. I was looking at it, thought, and this is someone I like and respect, and thought maybe at some point you have to put him out of his misery. Do you think there was an element of that?
Yeah, I do. Listen, I really like Thomas. I've met him and have the greatest respect for him. One of the things that I like about him is his compelling personality, and he's oodles of charisma.
Too nice?
Well, we've talked about that in terms of the players, but no, I think that he looks utterly and completely devoid of energy, and it's just been relentless. And he's left us in no doubt how difficult it's been. He's been on the record. This is the most difficult time of my life, the most difficult moment of my life, the most difficult job. There is an element where he'll be sad, but in 24 hours, he'll be probably relieved as well. And
will he be relieved? And you're the numbers man. Throw some numbers at me. I mean, Matt Hughes in The Guardian this morning did a very sort of quick piece in reacting to it, and he said that it cost £6.7 million to get Thomas Frank and his staff out of Brentford.
Yeah, and by the way, Brentford did Spurs a favour because I think the contractual number was much higher than that, but Thomas wanted to go, and again, big tick for Brentford.
Sorry, they accepted less than they were due?
I think so.
Really?
I heard that,
Do clubs do that?
Well, I think for lots of reasons, maybe they felt it was time. That hasn't been judged. And,
well, it's worked out for them, hasn't it, in terms of Keith Andrews stepping up?
Look, it's a terrible thing to say this, okay? But let's be clear. Keith Andrews has, I think, already 11 wins in a season, which is more than in the 4 seasons that Thomas was in the Premier League in a full season. So Andrews' performance, and they sold their 2 best players in the summer. So it's a terrible thing to say, and I feel bad because I like Thomas so much, but maybe we can, with hindsight, judge just how well he did at Brentford based on how well Brentford are doing this year.
Brilliant. Brilliantly run club. Matthew Benham, fantastic. Take me through the numbers, though. So it was £6.7 million they paid in compensation, 3-year contract. What's he on?
I think he's on about £7 million a year, £6 to £7 million. I think that was a factor in him getting him the job in the first place. At the time, the media reported that it was a kind of shootout between him and Marco Silva at Fulham. I think the price of getting Marco out of Fulham was considerably more than the price of getting Thomas out of Brentford, and I think Marco's wage demands would have been meaningfully higher than Thomas. So,
what are we talking, 10 million upwards?
I think probably, 9 or 10 million versus 7, both ways. So there's no question about it. Thomas was a more economic option, and that may or may not have been a factor for Daniel when he made that decision at the time. Probably, I would guess he would have a mitigated damages clause, which means that the payoff will not be the full 3 years, but will be some pre-agreed sum. If I was a betting man, maybe a year to 18 months, maybe.
So he's already been paid, what, probably about 5 million so far?
Yeah, but he will be. You've just said to me he's probably still got 2.5 years on his contract. I suspect he'll get a year's money to leave today. So
he will have made £12 million,
something like that for the journey.
13 wins. It's £1 million quid a win.
Yes, but just imagine we're in the boardroom at Spurs where they did not want this. They did not expect this. You've mentioned a couple of club legendary figures who might or might not be available. On the permanent front, my take, honestly, Henry, is that no really heavyweight manager is going to fancy either agreeing to a short-term agreement to the end of the season. That just isn't what top managers do who are in demand.
Employment.
And secondly, well, even those who aren't in employment, actually, that's a big ask.
What, like a Xabi Alonso?
Or Roberto De Zerbi.
Right.
Okay. I can't see managers like that who are in demand agreeing to mind the shop for the rest of the season. Yes, but I have to say, happy to be wrong, but I would say he would be a favourite for a permanent position, not for a temporary position. And that's a big call because there will be some big beasts available this summer, including the biggest beast in the Tottenham jungle, the comeback kid, Pochettino, who I'm sure most of my Spurs mates would love to see come back.
And he's been speaking very lovingly about an old flame. Yeah.
Look, another manager I have the highest regard for, lucky enough to have met him a few times and think that he would love. I mean, he's got a beautiful house down the road from Spurs. I sort of feel he never really left, if I'm honest. And when he comes out of the United States gig this summer, surely they would like to have a shot at getting
Never go
him back.
I thought you chief executives would always say.
There's a lot of people who think that, but he would definitely loom large as a serious candidate. And that is why you would imagine they'd like to find a solution to the end of the season. But the stakes are really high. Let me be really clear on this. Look at Forest. Forest went and got Sean Dyche. Mr. Marinakis wasn't thinking about, long-term strategic planning, certainly not thinking about the beautiful game. Horses for courses. They were fearing being dragged into a relegation battle and they went and got a survival specialist. There isn't an obvious survival specialist out there that Vinay...
Big Sam's doing ads.
Big Sam's doing those funny ads, yep. But let's be clear. Number 1, 2 and 3 priority right now is to stabilise the ship, sail north in that Premier League, back into that, safety zone. Yes, they've still got a very nice position in the Champions League, which could become very lucrative if they can get themselves through a couple of rounds. But honest truth, and I'm sorry to say this to my Spurs-loving mates, that has to be a secondary factor in this appointment.
If they win the Champions League, does he get a bonus, Thomas Frank? Will he be in his contract, even though he's only been there for effectively half the campaign?
A very good question. No, I suspect that there will be, a compromise agreement signed on his departure where he will forego some or all of any of those bonuses.
Would you, having been in the boardroom and understanding that situation, the dynamic that Johan and Vinay are going through at the moment, would you have taken into account that Tottenham's next game is a brutal one? It's Arsenal in town, well, not in town, just sort of coming to them. Arsenal playing well, fans absolutely loving it. And actually, you can't appoint a big manager now and give him that as their first game. So does it make sense to have a Heitinger who can step up from the coaching side?
Well, again, I think for our listeners' benefit, I truly believe that that they did not want to make a decision. But sometimes moments arrive where, frankly, events take over. And nobody was looking 11 days hence when this morning they felt they had no option but to
Were you
sack
ever influenced
Thomas.
by fans making decisions on managers?
Well, I put it a different way. I think, firstly, any CEO of a football club who doesn't put their fans' views very high up their agenda is going to get into trouble pretty quickly. Secondly, I get asked, probably the question I've been asked more in the last 20 years than any other is, when did you know he had to go? And last night was you just know, because you're sitting there. I saw them on the television, the chairman and the CEO sitting there, surrounded by, you tell me, I don't think it was 60,000, but 50 to 60,000 people who are making it quite clear what their feelings are. And I think you ignore that at your peril.
And the empty seats told a story as well of fans voting with their feet because they didn't like
they
football.
really did. So, look,
so right decision?
I'm afraid so. It was, they had absolutely no option, and it is the right decision. But the hardest bit is yet to come, which is we have essentially an entirely new management regime who hoped to have, a decent improvement phase in the Premier League, a lovely run in the Champions League, and then a summer to really dig into the transfer market, are now facing yet another management appointment at the wrong point in the season with absolutely no obvious caretaker or permanent managers. I do not envy them. It's a real mess, Henry.
All right, cards on the table. Start of next season, what division are they in and who's their manager?
Definitely in the Premier League. And I have to say, I would be really tempted to resurrect the magic of Poch.
Yeah, we agree on that.
Do we?
Yeah.
Good for you. Well, we're dressed like Spurs today.
We got Spurs.
And that's probably the first and last podcast we ever do within 4 minutes of a news story breaking. So I hope our listeners enjoy it, and we'll see you next week.